Ever since patch 1.05 came out, including not just weapons rebalances but also new AC parts and weapons, as well as a fully fledged ranked game mode that allows players to compete with each other, I've been playing every single day, in hopes of becoming a better pilot and developing my ACs further and further each time. Unfortunately, this does not seem to be the general intention of a lot of people, whose only desire is to climb the ranks by relying on either the cheesiest builds or simply by making use of the most unbalanced builds they can find online. Coupled with From Software's infamously bad netcode, which allows for many attacks that do not hit their target to deal full damage, and the end result is a meta dominated by two types of builds. Tanks, sporting the heaviest and hardest hitting laser cannons they can, resulting in an almost indestructible walking fortress that dishes out tanks sporting the heaviest and hardest hitting laser cannons they can, resulting in an almost indestructible walking fortress that dishes out nigh undodgeable beams of pure destruction, and quadruped missile boats that simply fly up to the top of the skybox and sit there raining down missiles on you, without ever engaging you in combat. This is especially egregious the higher your rank gets, resulting in increasingly unfun and frustrating matches. The result of attempting to climb the ranks against this sort of opposition is that I, and many other players, simply stopped trying to be creative with our AC builds. In fact, as I climbed up to A rank, I started noticing a rather serious trend where more and more of my opponents would be sporting one of these two builds with an AC called Loader 4 and either a default paint job with no decals or have no paint job at all, meaning they had most likely copied their own builds from someone else. Like a talentless hack whose idea of art is asking an image generator to make someone else's work their own. This problem persists from the early days of Elden Ring dueling, where every other opponent would be wearing the Bull Goat armor and wielding a pair of bleed-infused Naginata, with the only difference being that, in Armored Core, your loadout is far more important. These opponents would rely on the imperfect system we were given, and rather than attempt to make a healthy ecosystem where, win or lose, everyone can have fun, because your build and your opponent's build are both expressions of your creativity and love for the game and its community, they chose to create instead an ecosystem of extreme competitiveness, where no one enjoys the result. Unfortunately, once the meta becomes dominated by these hyper-competitive sorts, the previous ecosystem becomes an impossibility, as builds stop being that reflection of the player and instead become a reflection of the current state of the game's balance. In Elden Ring, this problem was mostly avoided by simply dueling at a lower level, where this sort of builds were harder to construct and therefore rarer. But in Armored Core 6, you have access to every single part with which to build your AC, giving players far more freedom and flexibility to change and adapt in between fights, continuously improving all the way. Unfortunately, it also gives them the ability to immediately jump on these incredibly cheesy builds, and, after the 20th consecutive sortie against the same types of setups, it becomes incredibly frustrating and discouraging, leading many to, as I described before, simply give up on the idea of expressing themselves through their AC, preferring instead to simply copy these same builds in order to simply be able to compete. As I said at the start, when I initially jumped into ranked play in AC6, I was excited to climb the ranks and gradually improve my skills and my cores. Unfortunately, after I surpassed B rank, I generally don't think I'll be playing this game at all until there are some major changes to the way the game plays in this setting. Now, keep in mind, none of this criticism applies to the game's base mode, where, due to tight hitboxes and nearly unrivaled movement, player skill and AC build mesh together in a way that creates an intoxicating feeling of constant growth and reward for your effort. If you watch 50 different people beating the bosses of the game, you'll likely see 50 different builds. If you watch 50 different duels, you'll be lucky to see more than half a dozen different builds. In my opinion, one of the most engaging and fun fights of the main game is when you face V4 Rusty's Steel Haze Ortus in combat. During this fight, both you and him are powered up by a coral vein, which supercharged your generators, allowing you to fight with an infinite energy supply. What this means is that, even though Rusty is usually a lot faster than the player, it's still possible for a slower AC to keep up with him. I think the game would benefit immensely from having these sorts of custom scenarios in a PvP setting. I also think that, in order to improve the player experience for this aspect of the game, one of the most critical things that From Software needs to do is improve the netcode significantly. In previous titles, such as Dark Souls, Elden Ring, and Bloodborne, where the gameplay was defined by the existence of a dodge roll, which, while providing invincibility frames, became the symbol by which the franchise is known. The existence of a dodge roll allowed players to make do, despite the netcode being subpar, as it allowed them to avoid enemy attacks without needing to rely on the game knowing exactly where they and their opponent's attack was. The lack of such a mechanic in Armored Core means that the only way to avoid being destroyed is to either physically move out of the way of an enemy's attack, or to simply be well armored enough to withstand the blow and retaliate with your own, given that it's incredibly difficult, if not outright impossible sometimes, to avoid attacks from players who have even a slightly inconsistent connection. You don't actually know where the attacks are. Only one realistic option remains. The alternative to this would be to reduce the damage dealt by such devastating weapons when in an AC versus AC environment, ensuring that, should a tank be matched against a light biped, the fight won't be completely one-sided, with the tank winning by default the first time they can land 2 consecutive hits against the lighter AC. With all of that being said, I would also like to take the time to ask for additional PvE-oriented game modes. Armored Core, much like other From Software games, is clearly a PvE experience first, with PvP added in as a secondary factor for player retention. I believe that if there was a challenging, cooperative experience in the game, there would be a significant number of players who would be interested in participating, whether that be a horde mode or simply a challenge mode or boss rush, especially if there was a ranking system attached to it. Give us some way to play with other people against waves of corporate entities, PCA MCs, to function as a test of our skills. Give us even harder fights than the ones we already beat in the campaign. And give us a ranking system for these fights as well. The boss fights of Armored Core were crafted to a level of fluidity and dynamism that leaves you wanting more the second that you finish all the pre-made sorties. And I think that the easiest way to give us this is to adapt some of the more popular single-player missions onto the multiplayer that can be accessed from the nest, so that we can experience this side of multiplayer. With all of that being said, thank you for watching the video all the way to the end. If you agree with anything I said, leave a like. If you want to see more of me, I'm on Twitch, streaming every day of the week. I'm also on Twitter and on Discord, so make sure to check both of those out too. Links in the description down below. Have a good one, everybody. Cheers.
At 30%.
We're losing the flagship!
Boy fighters, we need cover! Knew there'd be more. Come beat, buddy. Well, you're gonna finish this, right? I guess I'm not done yet then.